This is the second video looking at the non-violent protests of the civil rights movement, really going from 1961 to 1963. Look at the freedom rides. CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, organised the freedom rides in May of 1961. Following a number of NAACP legal cases in 1946 and 1960, it was illegal to segregate interstate buses and bus stations. However, like with Brown Topeka, most states in the South ignored the ruling altogether. A small group of black and white protesters began to ride the buses in open defiance of segregation signs. James Farmer, the leader of CORE, said, "We planned the freedom ride with a specific intention of creating a crisis. We were counting on the bigots in the South to do our work for us. We created a situation that was headline news all over the world and affected the nation's image abroad." Alabama's racists didn't disappoint. In Birmingham and Montgomery, white mobs led by the Ku Klux Klan, openly led by the Ku Klux Klan, attacked buses. One bus was stopped outside the town of Anniston and firebombed. The mob tried to hold the doors of the burning bus shut to kill everyone inside, but an exploding fuel tank allowed them to escape. Birmingham's racist police chief, Eugene Bull Connor, promised Klan members that they would have at least 15 minutes free to attack freedom riders before the police arrived. In Montgomery, a police escort ordered by President Kennedy abandoned the bus at the city limits, allowing a mob to attack the riders at the bus station. Some people criticised Martin Luther King for not riding the buses, but he was still on probation for a speeding offence and knew he'd be arrested if he got involved. He did, however, intervene when a white mob of 3,000 attacked the church holding a meeting of freedom riders in Montgomery. When he'd heard that black taxi drivers were arming themselves and preparing to clash with the whites, he took great personal risk and walked through the mob and persuaded the blacks to leave without causing more bloodshed. King saw the impact the freedom rides had had in the media and how it had triggered action from both President Kennedy and from his brother Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General. King persuaded CORE, SCLC and SNCC to work together on the freedom rides, and it shows that he was learning how to use the media to his best advantage and to the movement's best advantage. This didn't really work, though, at the Albany movement, the Albany protest of 1961 to 62. In November of 1961, demonstrators from SNCC and the Albany State College in Georgia organised sit-ins at Albany bus station. Hundreds of protesters were arrested, but the city authorities refused to desegregate it. Older leaders of the protest invited King to join in. He led a march and held a meeting with the city authorities, which seemed to suggest that they were prepared to desegregate. However, as soon as King left Albany, the city authorities went back on all agreements. Although they did desegregate the bus station, they closed the black parks, they sold the black swimming pool, they integrated the library but then took out all the seats, and refused to desegregate schools. And this was a major defeat for King and did show the weakness of focusing protest on one high-profile figure. When he left, the people in charge of Albany just went back on all agreements because the press had gone. King did learn from it, though. The entire black community had been mobilised in Albany. They'd come up with a jail not bail strategy, which meant that the protesters would not apply for bail, so they filled up the jails and they filled up the court system, which brought the legal system to a complete standstill. And by boycotting white businesses, they had led white businessmen to put pressure on city authorities. And King would take all of these lessons into the next protest, the Birmingham campaign. King chose Birmingham in Alabama for a number of reasons. SNCC and the NAACP were relatively inactive there, so there was no great danger of infighting between groups or of him having to share the limelight with them. King's own brother was a pastor there, so he had local knowledge and contacts. White extremism was very high profile in Birmingham. A black man had recently been castrated. The town had banned a book because it featured black and white rabbits. Negro music, as they called it, had been banned on the radio. Some of the worst violence against freedom riders had been in and around Birmingham. I think it says a bit about the racists that one of the performers they banned because it was Negro music was the white singer Elvis Presley. The Public Safety Commissioner of Birmingham, Bull Connor, was hot-tempered and a determined segregationist. He'd refused to give freedom riders police protection because it was Mother's Day. King picked Birmingham and Bull Connor because he was guaranteed a reaction, and that guaranteed media coverage. What was different is that in Birmingham, King clearly led the protests. He organised 4 marches in total, knowing that he would be arrested, that would gain media attention, and it would inspire more protests. Following his arrest in the second of the marches, he wrote the dramatic and inspirational letter from a Birmingham jail, which put into real terms what it felt like to be black in the South, and would have had a huge impact on black men and women who were not able to express themselves in this way, but also on white men and women who'd never really got it, who never quite understood what it was like. And the letter from a Birmingham jail does that. For the third of the 4th marches, King used black school children, some as young as 6, on a children's crusade. This was hugely successful because Connor arrested them, and the sight of 500 children in police cells does nothing for white extremism and does everything for the civil rights movement. It gets huge publicity. By the time of the 4th march, Bull Connor completely lost patience and used high-pressure water hoses, police dogs and tear gas on the peaceful protesters. One SCLC official thanked Bull Connor for his violent response, saying without him there would have been no publicity at all. The chaos in Birmingham got John F. Kennedy's attention. He said it was damaging the reputation of the city and of the USA. It was also the first time that Martin Luther King had really led the civil rights movement. The SCLC and King had shown America that Southern segregation was very ugly and very unpleasant. Extra donations poured into the SCLC. The Kennedy administration admitted that Birmingham was crucial in them being persuaded to put forward the Civil Rights Bill, which would eventually become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Kennedy, although personally supportive of civil rights, was very aware that in his first term of president he had won by an incredibly narrow margin. He could not afford to lose the white South. But Birmingham and King and freedom rides kept pushing civil rights in his face, pushing it to the front pages of newspapers, pushing it to the top of his political agenda, and he could not afford to ignore it. Birmingham also clearly identified Martin Luther King as leader of the civil rights movement. He said himself that he recognized that non-violent demonstrations, quote, make people inflict violence on you. So you precipitate violence. We're merely bringing to the surface the tension that's always been at the heart of the problem. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this one useful.